I want to welcome you guys to today's Brown Bag. It's the second in our monthly series this semester. We're going to have another one called Getting Things Done on October 17th. Also today there will be a symposium, a graduate student colloquium with some of our graduate students. That'll be from 2:30, so if you're able to stay around for that, that would be great too. Today we're very fortunate to have Professor Terrell Carver with us. Professor Carver is a professor of politics at the University of Bristol and a world-renowned political theorist, particularly on the work of Marx, Engels, Marxism, as well as philosophy and methodology of social science. In addition to lecturing around the world, he's also taught at institutions like ANU, Australian National University, University of Liverpool, Virginia Commonwealth University, Senshu University in Japan, and Pittsburgh College, among others. His publication record is astonishing. If you're feeling good about yourself because you've written a paper or you finished an article or a book or something, don't go to his website and search it because it'll make you depressed. Professor Carver, between 1991 and 2012, he had, according to his the website, 203 publications from an array of outlets, including manuscripts, edited volumes, and book chapters from Oxford Press, Cambridge, Routledge, Zed, Prometheus, and so on. A list of journals where he's published in theory, in international relations. The journal titles are practically endless. And he has, of course, recently co-edited the volume Michael J. Shapiro, Discourse, Culture, Violence from Routledge Press, 2012. Perhaps most significantly for our purposes here, Professor Carver is currently co-editor of the journal Contemporary Political Theory, and so he's generously agreed to give his time today for some informal remarks about publishing for graduate students and younger faculty. And so we're extremely grateful that he's here today. So please help me welcome with warm aloha, Professor Carver.
It's great to be here today and to be back. These show dates from 1991 are this delightfully vintage retro, so I've been coming here fairly regularly since. Since we've got limited time, I'll just launch into this. There's a little bit of a health warning to start. Namely, I'm just going to tell you what I think. Okay? So this is based on my experience as a journal editor, so a bit of thanks from my sponsor who helped pay for the flight out, so please have a read with it. Other people may tell you different, they may tell you the opposite, but that's the way it is. That's how life is and that's how publishing works. But I will just basically give you a clear view, which happens to be mine. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't claim that this is the only way to get published, because you will read many published things and see them in the journals that are absolutely not what I'm telling you to do. So I'm not saying this is the only way you can get published and you have to follow these rules or you'll fail. You may in fact break all these rules and succeed. However, my own position on this is you wouldn't get into my journal. And a lot of stuff that gets published isn't that good, or I think rather, unfortunately for the office, not as good as it could have been if people had been better editors and better reviewers. And that goes from everything up, spelling and punctuation and English grammar right up to the content and the framing, and as you'll find out, I'm quite keen on abstracts written in a certain way. So we'll just get going, and I'll run you through these slides. If you've got any serious problems or you don't understand something, let me know, otherwise we'll save it up and have discussion, because we've got a lot of different and experienced voices in the room who might want to come in and say the opposite of what I've just said. So about getting published, I would start this way. Target your journal. Go through some likely journals, look at your reading list, the bibliographies and things, and you know what sort of field you're in. And just start making lists or little spreadsheets of the kinds of journals that are likely to have stuff that will publish you, because honestly there's no point sending comparative politics stuff to my journal, really. It may be very good, but we're just not going to take it. So Do some homework here. You can really never do too much homework. As you narrow it down, make sure you read the latest issues of the journal, note what they're interested in, who the contributors are, how they write. As you do your own draft, make sure you cite those things that you're already reading, because journal editors and reviewers like the feeling of a reading community, and indeed that's basically what a journal is, or what we like to think it is. It's not going out in W.H. Smith's or something at the airports. But, these are little communities of readers, and get a feel and show that you have read what's in the journal. You can never do too much subtle flattery. That is, reading back to people, what they like to hear about themselves. And thank you very much for all the nice research on my website. I enjoyed it a lot. So, in a nice way, you can never do too much of reading things back to people. Start with the current issues and work backwards. Identify the themes and debates. Make a note of the articles you want to cite. Now, what do we do about journals and journal metrics and all the current obsession in different parts of the world in somewhat different ways about journal rankings? And if you want some more discussion about this, we can talk about it. But I'll just give you my quick and dirty summary here. You can go to the Thomson Reuters website and find out if your journal is Thomson Reuters listed. Now, my personal line on this to everybody, university administrators, writers like yourselves, and evaluators, is don't get too obsessed about impact factors and whatever it is, G-square coordinates or whatever statistical thing they've dreamed up, because these measures and indicators and indices are based on really relatively limited amounts of information. The rankings do change somewhat, not so much at the top, but when you get past the first 25 in a list of 150, people go from like 82 to 51 to 67, so, what's that about? And you find out that it's based on like 4 citations, because the window of citationality in most of these cases is quite low. So I think it's a mistake to micromanage and get obsessed about it. If you're in a particular field, you know which are the high prestige ones. If you want a bit of objective ammunition, you can just say it's Thomson Reuters listed. Now, I'm not particularly defending this. It's a private company. The whole thing about applying for listing, getting rejected, reapplying is a nightmare for editors. And it's totally untransparent. We have no idea why they make the decisions that they do, and who's on the list, and which list, and how many lists you're on. Never mind. At least you can say it's on the list. I think most people would agree that being on the list is, in general, at least it's something. But of course, there are lots of arguments, particularly when you're starting out, for publishing with a journal that you think is good for your work and is on the way up, and hey, it'll get on the list eventually. Maybe, so we think. My journal's been around for, I think, about 15 years, or slightly less, and made Thomson Reuters about 3 or 4 years ago before I took over. So, phew, that was done. I didn't, that was one less job. So, people obsess about rejection rates. Now, again, in discussion, I can go through the reasoning for this judgment, but I think they're fairly meaningless. And the quick and dirty reason is that, hey, it's political. If you want your journal to look accessible and you're short of contributors, your rejection rate goes down. If you want to say, hey, we're the tops, 99% of everything doesn't get in here, then you push it back up. So it's fairly easy manipulated. It's totally untransparent. Nobody knows but you, if you're the editor. And there are lots of different ways of compiling information and creating some kind of percentage on it. And also date of submission, date of acceptance, date of publication. That again, could be subject to manipulation. And like, here's the news: if we spend time on your article, it's probably going to get it better. So just because people get things in, snap, 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 and get them up and out, doesn't mean it's a good journal. In fact, my co-editor argues that that's a measure of how bad you are as a journal. There are some journals that dilly-dally around, and you'll have to find out about that the hard way, probably. But I'll go through that. But I think I wouldn't worry too much about so-called rejection rates. So get the house style and the requirements. Inspire confidence. Somewhere on the website or in the journal there's bound to be a list of instructions to authors. Follow all the instructions. You're trying to get your article out to external review. There's something called desk rejections, which again is part of the reason that the rejection rate bit is so meaningless. We get stuff in that's just for the wrong journal, and it just isn't going to make the grade. And you keep it for 2 weeks, and then you write a nice email saying, "Hey, sunshine, better luck elsewhere," and offering some helpful advice and that kind of thing. So you want to get past that stage. So it has to look good, and you have to be confident in it, and you need to inspire confidence in your reviewers. Which is the next stage if you've got past the editor's desk. So reviewers are going to look for professionalism, and again, here's a piece of news. Reviewers will apply standards of quality to your article that they do not apply to their own work. Okay? So this is not a charitable operation, and so reviewers, of course, vary as human beings do. Some of them will take delight in picking your thing all to bits. Others will be generous and informative. Some will write 3 or 4 lines or a paragraph indicating that they really don't wish to be a reviewer, at least for my journal anymore, because they haven't really spent sufficient time on it. So, what goes on in this naughty world is quite variable. Follow the submission instructions. I think it's better to go for one journal at a time, because if you're a reviewer, what you really don't want to see is review requests on the same piece coming in from 2 different journals. That really puts you off. So let's not do that. I think it's fair to give people 2 months, even in the state of speedy communication, before you make them, and then do so politely. Not as if you're the most important person in the world whose stuff is going to change the universe forever, because it's not. But something polite, and you could mildly suggest you'd like to try elsewhere, and you do have things to do. So I would go for it that way. Here we get into the content section. This is going to vary a lot from field to field and journal to journal, but I'll just tell you what I'm looking for, and then you'll know. This is admittedly a political theory journal, and as I say, depending on your field, things may be different. On the other hand, I don't particularly see how you could go badly wrong by following this. The first thing is you need a clear argument. What I call tour guiding is coming up an awful lot in journals, especially in political theory. Well, here we go. I've been kind of interested in democracy and communities, so here's a bit of a lit review that I've been doing, and then here's some criticisms of A, B, and C, and then I bring in Deleuze and Agamben because people do. And then, hey, I'm going to wrap up with a few thoughts, and here's a clue for further research now. No, but I'm not saying you can't get published doing that, because people do. I think it's much better for you, and certainly for us, if you've actually got a clear argument that adds value to what's already been said in some clearly distinctive way. We get a lot of pieces in which kind of take on a biggie in the field and find some little chip, flaw, crack, or blemish in their work, and then spend 25 pages obsessing on this and then saying, hey, isn't that good? But it only appeals to people who are already obsessing about that particular person and that particular problem. So you've got to go for something a little bit bigger than that, that's going to appeal a bit more widely in the reading community. It's not just specialists on Weber or whoever. And you should be able to say what's distinctive about what I'm doing. And I'm quite keen on subheads, although I don't particularly like introduction. We already know what's an introduction. But journals will vary, I'll just pick it out. And you must observe the word limit. Nothing tips this off more than stuff that's over the word limit. My stuff is so great and so world-changing, I need another 2,000 words. No, it's not. Okay. This again is more editorializing. Can we write the abstract last? And again, avoid the tour guiding. First I do this, and then I do the other, and then I bring in the lesson of Carver, and then I get to my conclusion, and I'm not sure what it is. But I'm done. I think it's actually a very, very good exercise to write an abstract in a declarative and impersonal style. Now, I'm not at all against I and a personal style in the actual article. Because, you know, we know you're a person, we know you're an author. I think that's okay, but I think it's an abstract. You should be able to write down, okay, now that I've said all this and shown all this and demonstrated all this, what are you supposed to think or know that's different? You know, well, you're supposed to think or know, this is so, and that is so, and that isn't so, and so here's the difference it makes. And you should be able to do that in a series of, you know, really quite flat and objective statements. Now, probably only 10% of the abstracts of the world are written like this, but it is quite an interesting exercise to reflect back to what is it I've actually said precisely. You know, this thing, that thing, that thing. What am I prepared to defend rather than just talk about? And I think that is quite an interesting exercise. And I think it builds your own confidence. So it sounds like it's the kind of grammar and syntax police, but it's much more like the thought police, really. Or the kind of thing to help you think about what you're doing. Okay, I mentioned that. Okay, this is really editorializing. Writing clearly organized paragraphs, please, not too long and not too short. Weak and wordy constructions. Okay. This is me editorializing. Attempts to, tries to, seeks to, wants to, desires to is just a waste of words. You know, say, do it, okay? Don't be, you're not getting any credit with me for being diffident. This is not to say your work should be full of wild generalizations that you can't defend. It's just make some generalizations that you feel you can defend. And if you make it such a generalization rather than seeking to, trying to, or wanting to, and you're not sure about it, think about it some more. And then eventually you'll just get more confidence in your own work. But if you go through, I have read some terrible examples of this recently. There is like 1,000 words that can just go, you know, 2% of this appalling sort of discourse of diffidence. So, you know, I'm not saying you can never use the word, but it certainly gets overused, and you know, you need confidence in what you're saying so you can defend it. That goes for lots of other weak and wordy constructions. I mean, there is a style manual which says omit needless words, omit needless words, omit needless words. And when you've only got 8,000 words, which is kind of typical, you'd be surprised, you know, how many words you can gain if you just go through sentences and stuff. Well, just basically drawing a line through words you don't need, and you'll spot the kind of wordy construction after a while. Don't write in the passive and the impersonal unless you're writing in German for German journals or something like that. I think it's just tedious, and again, you know, we get lost in a world where we don't know who thinks what about what's happening. Again, it's not a complete ban, but just, you know, it is argued, just is A, too many words, and B, say it, you know, and then I'll know, but not, you know, it is argued. Explain your terms. Journals, as I say, often have a broad readership, so it's tricky to get this. You don't need a big 101 on democracy or something like that, but if you use some term that you're going to have to judge. Be prepared to explain your terms. And again, it's quite good for your thinking to put terms of art, and the kind of jargon that goes on in a particular field into another 2 or 3 sentences to introduce somebody who hasn't been through exactly what you've been through on this particular subject. However, this is not an excuse to go Foucault 101. Hey, I've just read Discipline and Punishment, let me tell you all about it because it's so important in my work. It's just, that's going too far. Okay. Wrap up conclusion, take a few risks. In a sense, I mean, my method would be write the basic thing, then write the abstract, then write the conclusion. So with the abstract, you'll know exactly what it is you said, and then with your conclusion, you can think about, well, what does this mean? Where do I want to go with this? What does it suggest? How is it applicable elsewhere? From my journal, I don't want a summary of exactly what you've done. Thank you, because I've got that. And again, you've only got 8,000 words, so not too much. Take a few paragraphs and take a few risks. Do the bibliography in a consistent format that the journal likes. And make sure you've covered the most recent writers in the area. Surprisingly, we get a lot of things in which are just not up to date with the literature. I'll tell you the biggest giveaway, the thing that really gets you a desk rejection faster than anything else is, having looked at the abstract, I sometimes just turn to the bibliography, okay? And if it's all out of the 1990s, or all before, 2004, I don't think so. This is breaking the rule at the beginning that you should be, up to date with the debates and the literature and with that journal in particular. I mean, it amazes me how many people think that if it's a particular kind of historical piece, then obviously there's a reason. But with more general things, I mean, I'm just amazed the number of people who think that, the 1990s was yesterday. It wasn't. And it's important to show that you're really up to date with stuff. Actually, I've banned my undergraduates from going into the library, actually, because they might just start pulling books off the shelf and really thinking, oh, any old book will do. So we have to be a bit better than that. In-house pre-review from students and willing academics. With the academics, they have to be willing and have to be careful. If you have been around to conferences or met people or come across people like myself, and you think your piece is ready to go, sometimes worth a shot sending an email, asking very nicely if you have time. I appreciate a view. If you don't, then that's fine. No further correspondence expected. I love your work. Say something about how you've read the latest piece or something like that, and then you might get something. I mean, sometimes people are in the mood, sometimes they're not. The student review. This can often be very good. It can often be really, really bad. And I sometimes wish I had a secret microphone in the grad student mosh pit downstairs, because I go through a lengthy supervision or through a manuscript or something. Do this. 3 days later, they come back and say, well, I talked to so-and-so downstairs, and they just say, I said, look, I've told you what to do. I mean, do you really think those people know more than I do? Are they journal editors? How many PhDs have they examined? No. So it can be a way of recycling information that's just wrong or unhelpful, or allowing people to remain in some kind of comfort zone that's really a zone of risk. So you have to be a bit more careful about that. On the other hand, some people are great. So after review, uncommon in the better journal, shall we say, for any piece by anybody, no matter how famous, to sail through. It's, as you know, with my journal, everybody gets some kind of R&R advice and use of it. It may be a bit minor. But there's always going to be some kind of comment and feedback. So you have to get over pride and preciousness, which I know is difficult, and I hate getting responses back like this. Didn't they read it? Do I have to do this? Give myself a few days, get over it. And then just engage with it, and you'd be surprised after 48 hours or so, depending on your cooling off period, you feel, oh, this is really quite helpful. I haven't got through to this person, so I'll just explain myself a bit better. So engage with all the comments. You need to write a cover letter back to the editors of the journal saying, well, basically saying, reviewer 1 says this, this, and this, so I've done that. Reviewer 2 says, So the letters that come back are going to be a page or 2 pages, I would say. Don't go on too much, and don't be too defensive. You don't have to do everything they say. If you think they're wrong, just say, well, I've thought about this, and here's why I'm doing what I was doing in the first place. And most editors are perfectly happy with this. And so I think most reviewers are probably happy with it, too. You may get another round. You may get something back from the editors asking you for more changes. It may go through another. It may go back to the reviewers. But, that's the way your work gets better. Typically that's only going to happen if the editors really want it at that stage. So you can give yourself some credit, don't feel too bad. If you feel your friends will make fun of you and mock you and you don't want them to know, don't tell them. Okay? But I think it's actually good that they're saying, we're really going to take time and trouble and effort over this piece. So in the end, even if you get a desk rejection, which can include helpful comments, it's surprising the number of emails we've got back saying, well, thank you, that was really helpful. I feel I can try another job, and you spent some time on this. So, everybody feels good about it if you go back over it in that way. There's a few hateful, spiteful ones that are really actionable and libelous, and say how dare you, and that sort of stuff. But there's no point, so it's not your call. Assuming you get through all of this, you will get queries. I'm not quite sure what some of the American journal editors might call it. You'll get proofs. Queries are basically questions you get from copy editors. You'd be surprised the number of authors who complain how long it takes to get published, and then the answer is they have not replied on time. Production departments get quite defensive about this, so deal with it on time. Advanced online publication, or there's several other versions of this. I've forgotten what they're called now. White and black one is a different one. So this is basically, most journals have gone or are going over to a system where when we get the actual article through the copy editor's queries and the author's responses, and in the case of my journal, I read it before it goes to production, and I proofread it myself, and then take up any problems with production at that stage. It will then get posted as an online publication with a digital object identifier, and this is an official date of publication more so than the date of the paper copy. Paper is fading out fast, but it's not completely gone. But there's no huge significance in which issue you're in for many journals, such as mine now. So all we do is 4 times a year we collect what's already been AOP published, and it gets put into a paper deal, and it goes out in the usual way to the people who are still subscribing in that way. So I get a lot of queries, questions about how long does it take. So the news on that is that from submission, that is when you click and send your email. If everything goes really perfectly, and everybody's on time through the whole thing, we say it's about 12 months. Now this has brought it down from about 18, which is when we had to go through the collecting up the paper stage and the rationing and all of that. So it has drastically come down. But as you've gathered from the complications of this process, there's any number of points when more time might get taken up on this. So don't take it that I've said the journals have to get your stuff out in 12 months. I haven't. I'm just saying that if people want a rule of thumb, 12 months is about the quickest it's going to happen with my journal. My co-editor says if people are doing it quicker than that, they're not doing it very well, and they're letting you down by publishing more stuff before it's had enough scrutiny. I don't think we have much that actually snaps, even the best things that snap through before 12 months. So that's intended to be helpful. You'll get a PDF. Again, I don't think it's harmful sending this around to people that you may know or want to contact in the field, introducing yourself and your work with the usual proviso, well, you may not be interested, don't have time, whatever. But, here's something that relates to your work in the following way, and, explain how it relates to their work briefly. And they might be interested. And, they might ask you to be on the panel and something like that. And, you might get some response. And, who knows, they may pass it on to somebody else. So, it's, we all have to hustle and push the product or market and do that kind of thing. And so this is a collection of small worlds. And so I suppose once upon a time, about 8 million years ago, academics had the time to sit up and pick up a paper copy of a journal and read it through in the afternoon, thinking, well, there might be something here, but that vanished a long time ago. So you do have to bring your stuff to people's attention. There's a lot of listers that you'll know about, and people shamelessly self-advertise, but I don't see the harm in that. Some people get irritated when their email boxes fill out there, what's the scandal for, get stuff off the list, I'm interested. So, again, do a reasonable amount of self-publicity. Okay, over to you. Half an hour's worth. Yeah.
I heard before when another presenter discussed how to submit that if you've ever had an interaction with an editor, that it might be okay to send an email with it as an attachment. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think I get a lot of emails saying, well, I'm working on this, that, and the other, and do you think your journal would be interested? And our very standard reply is that we don't have a lot of hard and set rules. This is assuming that it looks like it's somewhere in the ballpark. And usually this kind of bland reply saying, well, we'll look at it about submission. What gets people's backs up a bit is if you're trying to kind of get in with some kind of half-baked promise that I'll do it. Now I'm in a fortunate position because my co-editor does submissions with his assistant, and I'm ring-fenced out of that, so I can target chat and encourage people to read stuff and make comments, and that's fine. Because once it goes into the other side, it's really nothing to do with me until I get it for the proofreading that I've described, at which point it's all accepted and wrapped up and it is really what it is and things like that. So that's the way we work. So I think it's I wouldn't go to somebody as an editor if it was me. I'd go to somebody as an academic who's already in the field. So I would rather people write to me on the subjects that I'm interested in. And I could say, oh yeah, this looks like it might be a good way to go with CPT, or or European Journal of Political Theory or Political Theory, or blah blah blah, or something like that. So I would kind of avoid trying to novel editors. Some editors may like to be novel, but that's just my kind of personal reaction on that. It's a bit of a wasted email. I would go down the expert route. Yeah.
There's an ambiguous line between how many essays you publish and how many of them are chapter prototypes when you want to do a book.
Yeah.
Different editors have different books. Editors have different views. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I have a pretty standard line. I think most journals want to be the first publisher. So if it's a book chapter or a chapter out of your own book or something like that, I think you need to make sure that you're going to get it in and published before it comes out in another form, and I would be upfront as to where it's going. Now, I don't think that would bother us if we knew that it was a chapter from a book that was coming out further down the line. If it's, but we need want some kind of assurance that we were going to be published first in the first point of publication and would be acknowledged in the subsequent chapter or book. So I think that's fairly industry standard, although again there may certainly be exceptions. Some, of course, special numbers of journal do go into book production anyway. I think you can't go wrong by being upfront about it. And it may, at the edge, be a reason why somebody, I mean, you may get it back saying, well, we're not interested for that reason. I mean, that is a risk. On the other hand, we wouldn't rule it out, and we might actually be quite interested for that reason if it's really coming out as in a prestigious publication or something later on and we get the acknowledgement. We just need to know it's first. It can get a bit tricky. I mean, I wouldn't cut it too fine in terms of timing on that because you risk putting people's backs up in that respect. So
what's happening is the book publishers are moving so much faster than they used to. Yeah. Sometimes they catch up with you.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a worry. And I think you just have to be, work on the best estimates. But I agree, book publication will speed it up too. Very much so. So I would, of course, in a lot of the research assessment that goes on, and a lot of the ranking and evaluating that goes on, articles have moved up in some fields relative to books. So, I mean, certainly in some countries, some academic communities, people are really focused on articles and not very worried about books anymore. I don't think that's quite so true here. But you might watch out for that. Don't cut it too fine, is my advice on that one. Yeah.
So, I mean, is there anything to be aware of or concerned about if you're writing a dissertation?
Well, that's an interesting one. Well, I think you have to take that out locally and see what people say. I mean, my experience in the UK has been that people go ahead and publish stuff that's in their dissertation. In terms of the examiner system that we've got, which is different from your committee system, if people had reviewed enough of your work for journals, they would decline to be your examiner. Now, that's not quite the situation you're in here. So there are some sort of issues. So I would take it out locally. And I think it would be hard to make a generalization there without me exposing myself to risk. But I don't think anywhere it's necessarily ruled out that I've ever heard of, but you have to check because universities have their own regulations and people interpret them differently. But something is, I mean, a PhD is a one-off and you don't want to put people's backs up. So, on the other hand, certainly in some parts of the world, particularly the UK and Australia, you don't get a job unless you've got a rack of publications already. So most of the time I'm advising people in a sense to get their stuff out, provided it's good, and get it into publication. You don't want to publish stuff too early that's going to embarrass you or put people off. So the PhD students that I know seem to manage an appropriate level of publication to get jobs and get through their dissertations with articles already in press anyway. In some cases are. The more careful ones have published on things that are not quite in their dissertation. Now that's actually quite a strategy worth considering, because it kind of broadens your appeal as a teacher and a scholar. You know, within a band, it's not going to help you too much, you know, if your subject is the politics of Vietnam and you publish on Renaissance painting or something. You know, that's fine for a hobby. But you need something that's that way. I had a student finish a PhD. The project was, I said, hey, let's find out everything there is to know about Guantanamo Bay and Camp X-Ray. Okay, like everything, because I knew she'd be good at finding out stuff. And she published in New Political Science an article about the TV show 24, because it was, it was about security studies was kind of her thing. So you see how that could work. I mean, you can kind of morph your hobbies and obsessions, whether it's Buffy or 24 or something, into some of the journals. And then you're kind of protected a little bit better. I've never run across anybody who was victimized or denied for having published something that was closely related or even related that went into a dissertation. Publishing the whole thing is a book. I'm not sure about that. But you have to inquire locally and be careful, but not misconverse. Yeah.
Can you explain more what you mean by tour guiding your reader from a editor's perspective? Like, because you've read so many rejected papers, you basically like pinpoint who's tour guiding and who's not.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those things that you know, when you see it, people set up to write some kind of discussion. Hey, I'm going to engage in debates, and they have a kind of general thread that they're pursuing, but it's never very clearly formulated into an argument that has basic stages. So they kind of introduce their sort of subject and then quickly get into, well, you know, X is a famous person and he said this, and Y is a famous person and she said that, and so-and-so said the other, and this is, you know, it kind of goes round and round like that. And then, you know, off I went to Egypt and talked to people, and then, or something. And then you kind of get back to a kind of conclusion that repeats what I've said, and then you read an abstract that says, well, you know, my subject was, I don't know, democratic theory, so I started with Harriet, and then, you know, I moved on to, I don't know, Chantal Mouffe and Carl Schmitt, because people do, and then I thought about Deleuze for a while, and then, you know, it's kind of like a map. So, and I'm thinking, well, okay, but it's a map of what? You know, where have I got to? Where's the trail? You know, on the map. What is it that, you know, I found? That's kind of what I'm saying. And if you can't answer that question, then, you know, I think you just need to think hard. And that's what I mean by making some defined and distinctive contribution. And you can do it in theoretical, conceptual stuff, not just empirical stuff. I mean, there is something that you can say. You know, I'm interested in democracy, so, you know, I mean, having read my discussion of Hegel and Deleuze or whatever, this is what we know about democracy. It's very abstract. So democracy is usually thought to be X, Y, and Z. Actually, this is deficient for A, B, and C reasons. Having examined the work of Hegel and Deleuze, I've come up with one, two, three. That's a contribution to democratic theory because it improves our understanding of representation and decision making, or something like that. I'm also quite keen, even the very theoretical stuff. I think political theory, you know, should be about something. And so I quite like, illustrative case studies, or something that's not just a mention. I can't sort of stand that. Well, we're talking about political theory and evil, so Hitler's a good example. Yeah.
What about the country case studies, like specific country case studies? What do you want to see as an editor in those pieces?
Well, that's a good one, because I just sort of suggested that to somebody recently, saying, I think this would be a lot clearer if we got, some contrary short examples of what it is that is wrong or insufficient or doesn't work, from the perspective that you're developing. So I think that's quite a good methodological point. Now, as with all of these things, with 8,000 words, they are quite precious, and you will find as you concentrate your thinking that you can actually say something quite reasonable, in terms of a contrary case study of 3 or 4 sentences or a paragraph or two, with some appropriate citations in case people want to pursue it. So I think that's quite a good point. I mean, it's a basic sort of Geranian move, isn't it? Things are defined by what they're not. You need to know what doesn't work to understand what does. Yeah.
Not too much historical background, for instance?
No, again, it depends on the journal. I mean, if it's history of political thought, it's all about historical background. I actually got something published there that was had nothing in it except historical background. But basically, for most things, most of the time, no. I mean, if you're starting with the current literature kind of debate, you are already talking about people where the historical background is fairly well known, unless you have something particular to contribute. We don't need the... In the beginning, the Earth was a great gassy ball, and it went round and round, and this and that happened. And as I say, in certain communities, you will know who is on all the syllabuses and who gets studied in a one-on-one way. So that was the point of my comment about Foucault, is that that's just ubiquitous everywhere. So you score much better if you can say 2 or 3 words about Foucault and then show precisely why he's relevant to your discussion, in some precise work. And that does suggest real engagement rather than just noticing the geography of what's out there for the sake of it. But I really have had 2 or 3 pages of my undergraduate notes on Foucault. Thank you, Matt.
Have you got any, I mean, you've published a lot, so have you got any strategies for the process you typically do?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, this is, you asked about me. So it's confession time. I find writing articles really difficult. I find it a very difficult genre. So I guess if you take one thing away from this, everything comes down to genre. So it is a particular kind of discourse that meets the requirements of particular people and speaks to a particular audience. And your PhD dissertation is a somewhat different kind of discourse. And so are the books which are not PhD dissertations, which are written years down the line by people who are already established. Now, I think oftentimes these books could be a lot better if they were a little bit more like PhD dissertations. On the other hand, PhD dissertations, examiners' committees want everything to be nailed down and covered and all that kind of stuff. So you're dealing with a different genre. It's like a novel, a novella, a play, a short story. Anybody who does it, or a feature article. One of the assessments that I get my undergraduates to do is you have to write a feature article for a named publication, real or fictional, on a famous feminist. I give them a list. And I mean, okay, if you have a favorite, you can come and talk to me. Anyway, they get a list. But that's the hardest thing, is to write for the general reader, I find, for the students that I teach. They just have no concept. Because I think they've been writing kind of pseudo-academic essays for too long. And they just assume it's written for the teacher who already knows and is paid to be interested. It indeed gets, dismissed or into trouble if you're not sufficiently interested. So I said, look, write this for your sister, or some other person who's not a student, not a teacher, isn't necessarily interested. Just don't assume everybody's interested in Audrey Lorde or Harriet Rich or wherever it is, and start there. You've got to have some snazzy hook at the beginning, and it can be a picture, it can be what you want. You've got to have a headline. So I think genre is really important, and actually that comes up in your academic writing. Somebody will ask you to write a non-technical summary or a website news item or something like that, and you have to be able to talk about what you're doing in a different mode for a different audience. And a lot of academics find this challenging. Some co-authors are better than others. Some of them have no idea how to write one paragraph for a website audience on what they're doing. So it's good practice. Well, coming back to me, I find journal articles quite difficult because you have to establish your authority to speak. And the common trope in the genre is that you should be citing, referencing, or agreeing and disagreeing with people who are already there. And you're lucky if you're a PhD student because you should have the time to spend coping with that. But some of the rest of it, I've already made up my mind, I think. And I'd rather just be allowed to go with it. And that's why I prefer book chapters, actually, because book editors, point to the chapter and say, hey, write what you know. And I go through and put in the citations and references, things like that, in a minimal way. But on the whole, I feel, able to, I can shoot off my mouth at this point. But journal articles, it's more difficult to get away with that. You have to do decent lit review and be respectful, which I find quite difficult in some fields, of people who've said something about this. I feel it circulates misinformation, but that's just my view about the state of Marx studies. I guess I write about sex, gender, and sexuality. I'm much more respectful. So I find those easier to write, actually. So you have to establish your authority to speak, and you have to have an argument, I think. You have to know what it is. And you have to discipline the whole discussion, and that just takes a lot of time. Reading and rereading and getting other people to read it. So I guess the one article I've done recently that I'm really proudest of took several years to work on. And it took several years to figure out what it was exactly I was saying. Because it started off tour guiding, in fact. Well, it started off writing program notes for the Royal Opera in Covent Garden. But anyway, and then it became a bit of sort of tour guiding of, hey, I've been watching this movie and it does remind me of Judas Butler. And, you can teach Butler from watching this. And so I was doing a kind of show and tell about Butler, and somebody said, hey, Butler mentions this movie, but she doesn't like it. And I thought, puzzle. And it's good to have a puzzle, you see. And a puzzle about somebody famous is really good. Okay. Nobody more famous than Judas Butler, right? Okay. So I thought, right, there is a puzzle. Why doesn't she like this movie? And so that sort of took me off down a particular road, saying that she got the movie wrong because she got drag wrong, and because she got, which I thought was pretty big stuff actually. She got, having got drag wrong, she didn't really see the point of the movie, which was a ruthless deconstruction of heterosexuality, which isn't something she's terribly interested in, but anyway. So anyway, but it took about 2 or 3 years to get to that. And I had a lot of help from it's actually published in CPT, but I wasn't the editor. I had no idea I was going to be editor at the time. The editors and the reviewers went over this a couple of times. Well, this seems, you're onto something, but think about it some more. And it took a long time, and patience. And so I said, I didn't want to give it up, but I got annoyed. along the line. So, you know, in a sense, you're getting that experience. So, my point really is different genres and about how to do it. Be prepared to take some time, I guess, and be patient with comments and criticism, because you'll just end up finding with an argument if you didn't really have one. And you'll end up with something you'll be really proud of and that is really clear. So that's what I'm saying.
I found out that every journal organized the article to the central theme, right? An idea, like one time, for example. So apart from when there is a special issue, how do you find out, what's the best strategy to find out the next?
Yeah.
Because I found out that it changes completely your percentage, your probability to be published, if your piece will fit perfectly in the next big issue. So from the other side, how do you guys, you receive the article, you decide later to put it together, or you decide the issue before?
Well, practice varies a lot on special issues. My journal has decided we are just going to focus on top quality articles. There will be no special issue. Other journals are mostly special issues. They all say that it's all peer reviewed, but if you're inviting people, you do go through well, you're supposed to go through the reviewing process, but in a sense it's already kind of accepted. So, but on the other hand, most evaluators don't know it's a special issue, because especially with advanced online publication, where it just appears as a single item. What I would do in this case is, when you're looking around journals, avoid the ones that do a lot of special issues, because it does suggest a certain kind of cliquiness, and you know, they're spending pages on that they're not spending on one-off submissions. Now, that's not meant to be a criticism; they can do what they like, but it may be that that's the best journal, but it's a kind of tick against it, I would say, if they're doing a lot of special issues in that way, because they're creating, you know, they're doing it that way, and unless you're asked, you're obviously not part of it. So I would go for the journals that don't do that so much.
Because they will pay more attention
Yeah.
to the quality of your article.
Yes. Yeah, so I would do that. And then I think the lucky break is finding not so much a deficiency or some kind of quibbly criticism. Well, you know, insecurity studies, Lena Hansen is a big name, but you know, her work really, you know, if she forgets about something, well, I don't think she probably forgets, she's just not focused on that, you know. So you need something that's really a puzzle. Well, you know, if you could come up with something like my for example. Well, if you take Lena Hansen's work on the one hand, she seems to say this, on the other hand, she says that. So what is the puzzle going on here? I mean, is she really contradictory and confused, or is there something to be gained out of this? So that's often good if you can pick on somebody in a productive way that's respectful, I think. I mean, finding that, you know, I mean, if she got a date on page 22, that's really not interesting. So find out, you can easily tell from most journals who the kind of top contributors are and the sorts of subject they're interested in. I think it's helpful, you know, to have something that obviously doesn't come out of just that discussion, something that you're actually bringing in that's fresh, whether it's another thinker or another situation or a set of facts or something. I mean, you would know that from the work that you do, what your particular discovery is. I find we have a compulsory undergraduate dissertation and also a compulsory one-year master's dissertation. So I see a lot of students who've been overly well trained in writing academic essays. And it's really hard kicking them out of essay discussion mode. And I'm saying, look, you have to go and find something out. Okay? You have to bring me a box of stuff. Unpack it. Okay? And you have to know what the box is. Okay? I think, I don't particularly like data on data set, you can call it that, but you know, I mean, I kind of like a box. You know, I don't care what it is, but you know, that's why I chose Guantanamo Bay, actually, because I said, look, it's got a particular starting point. we don't know as much about it as we might. In other words, it advertises itself and produces images and text and stories. There is a lot of stuff about it, but it's very controlled, mostly. So, I thought that was kind of a good box. I mean, for a whole dissertation, it's too big for an article. I mean, you might, but you could see you need a kind of delimited box of stuff, and it should be kind of a puzzling box. I mean, the original puzzle back one time, I don't know what it is. Well, if it's all that controlled and that top secret, why do we know anything about it? Or what are the strategies of information release that we can detect from what's released? That was fascinating, actually, because one of the things she did was just collect up all the images. And what is pictured and how people and things are pictured changes, and she made them into a kind of chronological set. That was really interesting. Well, the first images were this, orange suits, orange suits, not doing that anymore. And then they had a weird set of images of things like, shoes, and, prayer mats, and, empty rooms, and things like that. Anyway, I can't remember in a second. But you need a box and you need a puzzle. I think that works. It's got to be a very neat one for an article. So don't try to do too many different kinds of things in it. And as I say, I think that's a hard genre. I think it's hard to have a neat puzzle and a neat box. And the best articles will be more like that than they are like my statement trip to Mississippi. We started in New Orleans, then we went to Natchez, and then we saw articles and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I think we should probably wrap up, but maybe just one last question that I have is, are there any sort of trends or sort of ideas that are either over the long term or even the shorter term that are sort of coming up as you're an editor of CPT and kind of in the discipline of theory in general?
Well, I think that's a hard one. Some journals are, more kind of experimental and open than others. So you'll find out from others in your community who they are. So I'm not naming names, but I think we say we're more open to interdisciplinary work, to IR. We're not keeping the kind of bandedness on what kind of object political theory is. We're open to all kinds of material approaches and things like that. So it's worth looking at what the journal says about itself. Other journals are, I think, more conservative, but then editors change from time to time, and editorial policies change also. So I think it would be hard to say anything about trends in journals. I mean, the overall trend is multiplying journals. And naturally, I would say this, that, lowering standards. But, that's just part of life. I guess my message is that take some time and get into a good journal. You probably won't get into the very top ones first off. But get into a good journal and set your sights high, but not too high. I've seen people rush in with stuff to an online journal with not very many subscribers and this kind of thing. And they think they've done themselves a lot of good. But I think you're better off putting the time into getting something into a more widely recognized and well-established journal than kind of rushing in with my thoughts to the Journal of Cultural Nonsense or having something like that. And we do this academics is riddled with snobbery and marketing like anything else. So I think you just have to be aware of that. Okay, thank you very much. Great.